This is a single graded card. And this is every graded card in the entire world. Over 113 million slabs fit inside this 100 by 100 foot square. For scale, here's every graded card in the world beside the pyramids of Giza. And here it is beside the Statue of Liberty. And beside every ounce of gold ever mined in the history of our planet. This stack of cards is over 37 feet high and weighs approximately 22 million pounds. That's heavier than 1,800 elephants and the Eiffel Tower. In fact, if you stacked all these cards into a single pile, the stack would be 449 miles high.
Now, nobody knows how many total copies of cards have been printed throughout history. Last year in Top Series 1, Series 2, and Update, there were over 90 million base paper cards alone. That doesn't include all the parallels and everything else on the checklist. So I think about it this way. If there are 25 million different cards printed throughout history with, on average, 1,000 copies per card, and we got all of those cards graded with PSA, that would stack up to over 130,000 miles, or over halfway to the moon.
All right, but why does this matter? Well, maybe this visualization will help us finally answer the question, are we in the junk slab era? Let's find out. All right, before we get started, I've got to give a shout out to my guy Ryan over at GemRate. Visit gemrate.com for all kinds of data like this. Now let's get started breaking it down by era. All right, let's get started with pre-war. That's all the cards from 1945 and earlier, and that makes up 2.44 million graded cards. That accounts for 10 inches on our stack, or 29 layers. All right, next up, we've got the vintage era. That's gonna take us all the way from 1946 to 1986, and that makes up 22.94 million cards. That's 7.5 feet on our cube, or 272 layers. All right, next up, it's the junk wax era, and that goes from 1987 to 1992. That's gonna make up 8.24 million cards, 2.68 feet, or 97 layers on our cube. All right, moving into my favorite era, and it's the 90s. That's gonna take us from 1993 to 1999. That's 11.46 million cards. That's 3.73 feet, or 136 layers. All right, now we move into the modern era from 2000 to 2011. This is when a lot of people fell out of the hobby for a period, and that's gonna make up 13.62 million cards, 4.43 feet, or 161 layers on our cube. You ready for this last one? It's the ultra modern era, starting in 2012 all the way up to this present moment. This is gonna add 54.87 million cards to our cube. That's the equivalent of 17.86 feet, or 650 layers. All right, so what should we make of this breakdown? Well, when looking at grading data across eras, you can really see the evolution of the hobby. Pre-war cards are incredibly rare, but they carry a massive weight, both in importance as well as in price premium. I was actually shocked when I saw the number of cards graded from the vintage era. Yes, it's a 40-year time frame, but I didn't expect to see almost 23 million cards graded. What's not surprising is that nearly 50% of the graded cards are printed from the last 14 years. The hobby is booming, and grading in particular has never been more popular. So how does the data break down by grading company? Well, let's start with Beckett, aka BGS or BVG for their vintage card service. That's gonna add 10.99 million cards to the foundation of our cube, the equivalent of 3.58 feet, or 130 layers. Now let's take a look at CGC. That's gonna add 9.13 million cards, a total of 2.97 feet, or 108 layers added to the cube. But what about SGC, the famous tuxedo slabs? Well, that's gonna be 8.45 million cards, 2.75 feet, or 100 more layers added to our cube. All right, and a shocking one, or maybe not, it's PSA. 85.08 million cards added. That's 27.69 feet, or 1,007 layers. All right, so what's the deal with grading, and why are these numbers so lopsided? Well, Beckett's numbers have been declining for years now. Their owner was charged with fraud, and their leadership team has turned over multiple times. SGC was acquired by Collectors, the parent company of PSA, and they've mostly served a niche for vintage and lower dollar ultra modern cards. And CGC is mostly grading trading card game cards. So there's just no denying, bottom line, that PSA now dominates the grading landscape, and it's hard to see that changing at any point soon, if ever. All right, now let's move into breaking this data down by sport. This one's gonna be fun, and let's start out with hockey. Hockey contributes 3.84 million cards to our cube. That's 1.25 feet or 45 layers. All right, now let's move on to football, and this one's less than I expected. Football has 16.74 million cards. That's 5.45 feet or 198 layers. Moving on to basketball. Basketball is at 17.55 million cards added to the cube. That's 5.71 feet or 208 more layers. All right, moving on to the big boy, and it's baseball, the oldest sport in the hobby. This is gonna add 36.36 million cards to the cube, the equivalent of 11.83 feet or 430 layers. All right, what if we combine all the other sports into one? Soccer, golf, tennis, and all the others. That's gonna add 5.83 million more cards, the equivalent of 1.90 feet or 69 additional layers to our cube. All right, we've got one more massive chunk to add, and that's gonna be TCG and non-sports combined into one. This adds 33.23 million cards or 10.84 feet, 394 final layers added to the cube. All right, so the sport breakdown is actually my favorite because it tells the story of how many different types of collectors there are in the hobby. Baseball cards are where it all got started, and the vast majority of pre-war and vintage cards are baseball cards. Football, the most popular sport in the US by a large margin, has been rising in popularity within the hobby over the last 8 years or so. Basketball is a superstar-driven league, with Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Kobe Bryant combining for over 17% of all the basketball cards ever graded. And in terms of which category is the most popular right now, it's TCG, specifically Pokemon, by a wide margin. Over 29% of all graded cards are now from TCG and non-sports, with many of those cards having been graded in just the past couple of years. So now that we have visualized all this data, we've got to answer the big question. So are we in a junk slab era? Well, 2 years ago, I made a video that we were officially in the junk slab era, and things have only ramped up massively since then. Market Movers has tens of thousands of graded cards that have sold for $2 or less in the past year. Those tens of thousands of $1 to $2 slab sales would certainly suggest that we are. A poll I conducted 2 years ago suggested that most collectors do not want to own more than 100 graded cards for their personal collections. Yet with 114 million cards graded so far and counting, that would suggest that over 1 million collectors need to have at least 100 graded cards in their PCs. At what point does the sheer volume of graded cards outpace the number of collectors who want them? The truth is that the vast majority of hobbyists don't even like graded cards. They prefer to not pay crazy premiums for someone else's opinion. They prefer to let the cards speak for themselves and to store them in binders, top loaders, or maybe even gloriously in a one-touch magnetic holder. The fact is that far too many of these graded cards eventually become worthless. Go to any card show or to any card shops and you'll find graded boxes with $5 or less graded slabs. Any takers on an SGC 8.5 Lonzo Ball Donruss base rookie? No? Well, how about a PSA 9 Will Greer optic base rookie card? No takers? I didn't think so. Graded cards give some collectors a false sense of rarity. In fact, I often refer to, quote, low pop cards as artificial rarity. Because for any card to be low pop, it could simply mean that not many copies of that card have ever been sent for grading. A PSA 10 1997 Fleer Dino Raja base card might be pop 1. That doesn't mean that it's rare, or as amazing as the Fleer Ultra Masterpiece True 1 of 1 of Dino Raja. Another challenge for many collectors is that graded cards take up more space. They're far larger and far heavier than a raw card, and many collectors find that their space to store even little pieces of cardboard can be at a premium. And finally, massive grading submissions of seemingly every card has led to periods of major backlogs for the grading companies, making it difficult to get cards back in a timely manner. In fact, PSA shut down for a year during the COVID boom because they received so many cards in such a short period of time. Grading has become the be-all, end-all for far too many hobbyists, and it's only a matter of time before we find depressed collectors dumping their graded cards into the Hudson with those 52 mantles of old. So what's the devil's advocate case here? Well, grading serves 3 primary purposes. 1, authentication. Grading ensures that the card is real, not fraudulent or a backdoored copy of the card. And it also ensures that the card isn't altered in any way. 2, condition grading gives you a numerical assessment of the overall condition of the card's corners, edges, surface, and centering. And 3, encapsulation. Grading sonic welds the card inside an acrylic case, preventing tampering and protecting the card from potential damage. And grading with PSA also provides collectors an opportunity to work on set registries, to register the cards they own and to compete against other collectors. It also makes the cards far more liquid, especially when selling online, helping to protect against returns because the condition has already been professionally assessed, unlike raw cards, which are wide open for debate. But more than anything, let's be honest, grading has become incredibly popular because it increases the value of the cards overall. To hit that Gem Mint 10 can feel like winning the lottery, often providing a 3 to 4x multiplier on the price of raw cards, if not substantially more. But grading isn't without risks and downsides. Many people send their cards in expecting Gem Mint 10s, only to get them back as 9s, or 8s, or sometimes 7s, or worse. This causes many collectors to lose a lot of money, while also not possessing their cards for months on end. Of the 85 million cards created so far by PSA, only 29 million have received that coveted Gem Mint 10. So it's far from a guarantee that your submission will help you retire someday. The truth is that many slabs, whether those that receive low grades or those of players who fade over time, eventually become nearly worthless. Some say that we're not in a junk era at all. They say it doesn't matter if cards are graded or not, that the bottom line is that many cards lose their value over time, and that grading has no impact on that whatsoever. They also argue that collectors have wised up and no longer send those base Topps flagship rookies like they did when they flooded PSA with Kyle Lewis and Luis Robert. And they argue that grading holds a critical place in the hobby for all the benefits that we explained earlier. So if some of those cards are sent in as long-term casualties, it's for the greater good. So what do I think? I honestly don't know what to make of all this. I've graded cards in my PC right now. I appreciate it, especially for rare 90s cards, to ensure that they're authentic and not fraudulent or altered. I like all the aforementioned benefits that grading offers, but I also believe that 2.4 million cards being graded per month is bound to catch up with the hobby at some point or another, even if that point is in the year 2050. So you tell me, what do you think? Are we in a new junk slab era? The good news for all of us is that if SpaceX doesn't find a way to get us to the moon, we could always stack all the slabs and just climb our way there. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy investing, keep on collecting, and make sure to have fun.